Welcome to Lantern and Shroud, a podcast of ghost stories, folklore, and the things that haunt the spaces in between. I'm Natalie, and in each episode I'll guide you through these tales, and my husband Gav will bring each one to life through his artwork available to watch whilst listening on YouTube. So if you're ready, let me take you somewhere forgotten, a place with history buried in the soil, a story whispered down through time, a haunting that never quite lets go. Some tales are true, some are twisted by years, and some are still happening. So light the candles, draw the curtains, and listen closely, because you've just stepped into Lantern and Shroud. Wales has always been a land of legends, dragons on mountains and ghosts in castles. But in the late 1970s, a new kind of story began to haunt the hills and coasts. The story of strange lights in the sky. It began in 1977 in the quiet village of Broadhaven on the Pembrokeshire coast. One winter's day, a group of school children ran screaming into their classroom, wide-eyed and breathless. They claimed they had seen a silver, cigar-shaped craft land in a nearby field. Some swore they saw a figure beside it, tall, metallic, in a strange suit. Their teacher demanded they draw what they had seen, and to her astonishment, the children's sketches all showed the same thing. Word spread quickly, and Broadhaven became the heart of what newspapers called the Welsh Triangle. Farmers spoke of mysterious lights that hovered above their fields. Families claimed they saw glowing shapes moving silently above the sea. Some whispered of beings walking the land, strange figures glimpsed at night. The police were called more than once. Officers patrolled fields, scanned the skies, and wrote reports that they could never quite explain. In the years that followed, the sightings spread. Motorists driving the lonely roads at night reported lights that paced their cars. Campers told of humming sounds that seemed to come from nowhere. Even trained observers weren't immune. In later years, a police helicopter crew near Cardiff reported a close encounter with an unidentified object. Pilots, too, filed reports of lights that danced in ways no known aircraft could. By then, the Ministry of Defence had taken note. Files were quietly opened. Letters from frightened villagers and serious police reports were logged away. Most were explained as aircraft stars or hoaxes, but a few, just a few, were marked unidentified. Yet still the stories grew. In Abergavenny, strange shapes were said to drift over the town at night. In the valleys, people stood in their gardens, pointing at lights that shimmered then vanished into the dark. Skeptics said it was imagination, Chinese lanterns, or the contagious excitement of the Broadhaven children's tale. But for those who had seen the lights, and for those who still remember the silent nights of 1977, the skies over Wales have never felt quite empty. Even today, Freedom of Information requests to the police show new reports trickling in. Brief flashes of strangeness, logged, dated, and filed away. Perhaps it's trick of the eye, or perhaps, as the old stories of Wales suggest, there really are things in the dark that we don't yet understand. But Wales was not alone. Just 3 years later, in the dying days of December 1980, another forest hundreds of miles away would fall under the same shadow of mystery. The forest was Rendlesham, deep in Suffolk. On a cold night near Christmas, strange lights appeared beyond the perimeter fence of RAF Woodbridge, then used by the US Air Force. At first, guards thought it was a downed aircraft. They followed the glow into the trees and found themselves in a scene that would become legend. The air was electric, the forest floor lit by pulsating lights. Some swore they saw a metallic craft, triangular, 9 foot wide and 6 foot high, etched with strange markings. Others described beams of multicoloured lights silently stabbing down through the trees. One of the security guards, Jim Peniston, reached out, running his hand over the hieroglyphic-type symbols on the craft surface before the light flared and the object rose into the sky without making a sound, but leaving 3 depressions in the ground and scorch marks on nearby trees. Over the following nights, the lights returned, pulsating and red. Senior officers went into the woods recording their observations on tape. Breathless voices describing lights like stars moving, glowing, dripping sparks of light. Deputy Base Commander Lieutenant Colonel Charles Holt joined an investigative patrol. He carried a tape recorder, the recording of which is now named the Holt tape, a Geiger counter to detect radioactivity, and a star scope, an optics tool, and other equipment. On this night, during his investigation, more luminous phenomena was observed. Lights in the sky, objects moving, strange flashing red lights. Holt's signed official memo for the UK Ministry of Defence was later composed in early 1981, summarising the observations of unexplained lights. The Rendlesham Forest Incident, as it became known, was Britain's Roswell. The Ministry of Defence opened files, investigated, and later released their records. Explanations were offered. Some skeptics argue that the light seen from the forest could have been the beam from the Orfordness Lighthouse, which has a rotating light which flashes every few seconds. Signals from it could appear to be moving lights in the forest depending on atmospheric conditions, or that it was bright stars or planets, possibly distorted. During Holt's observations, some of the star-like objects were later identified as possible stars. Maybe atmospheric effects, reflections, fog, mist caused distortions. Forests tend to have odd visibility, shadows, broken trees, etc., which might be misinterpreted, especially in the dark. Or was it merely overactive imaginations? Yet the witnesses, trained military personnel, held firm what they saw was real. Bonnybridge, in Scotland, sits nestled between Falkirk and Stirling, a small town surrounded by farmland and steeped in ancient history, with Roman forts and stone circles. It looks, at first glance, like anywhere else, but the locals will tell you otherwise. They'll say the skies above this town are alive, with lights that shouldn't be there. And it all began one winter's night in 1992. A man was out walking his dog near the canal. The night was clear, the stars sharp and bright. Then he noticed something strange. A brilliant light, too low, too steady to be a star. The light dropped from the sky, landing silently on the road ahead of him. Frozen in place, he watched as the object shimmered, glowing white, almost metallic. The dog whined, ears pinned back, and then, without a sound, the object lifted, hovered, and shot off into the sky at impossible speed. From that moment on, reports poured in. Families standing in their back gardens watched enormous triangular craft slide silently overhead, blotting out the stars. Drivers on country lanes pulled over as their cars stalled, strange lights passing low above their bonnets. One witness swore they saw a craft hovering close enough to make out markings, as if the machine itself was built with a geometry we don't understand. By the mid-1990s, Bonnybridge was receiving hundreds of reports every year, and local councillor Billy Buchanan found himself at the centre of it all. His office was inundated with letters, phone calls, and first-hand testimonies. So many, in fact, that Buchanan began petitioning Parliament, demanding answers from the Ministry of Defence. He said there are more UFO sightings in Bonnybridge than anywhere else on Earth. The Ministry of Defence replied politely, and then dismissed the case. UFOs, they insisted, pose no defence threat. End of story. But for the people of Bonnybridge, the story had only just begun. The sightings didn't stop. They became part of life. Locals driving home at night glance upward more often than most. Children grown up in Bonnybridge learn that strange lights in the sky are not a bedtime story, but a fact of life. And the question hangs over the town. Are these visitors from somewhere else? Secret military craft? or simply the imagination of a community living in the shadow of its reputation. 3 decades on, the Bonnybridge Triangle remains one of the most active UFO hotspots in the world. The lights still come, the skies still shift and shimmer, and still, no one knows why. What is happening in the skies above Scotland? Perhaps one day we'll find out. Now we travel to Ireland, a land of myth, stone and stories. But not all of those stories take place on the ground. Some come from the skies above, tales of flying ships, glowing lights and craft that defy explanation. The year was somewhere in the 8th or 9th century. Ireland was a land of kings and monasteries, of carved stone crosses and windswept plains. In the heart of the country, along the slow grey waters of the River Shannon, stood the monastery of Clonmacnoise. It was a centre of learning, where monks bent over vellum by flickering candlelight, recording the great and terrible events of their age. They wrote of famine, of pestilence, of wars between rival clans. And on one particular day, they wrote something stranger still. Simply recorded as, ships with their crews were seen in the air. That's it. No flourish, no attempt to explain, just a sober line among accounts of battles and eclipses. Yet that one sentence has echoed down through more than 1,000 years, stirring the imagination of historians, folklorists, and UFO researchers alike. Later retellings give us more detail. They tell of a day when the monks and villagers gathered outside the monastery, staring upwards in disbelief. There, sailing above the clouds, was a vessel unlike any they had ever imagined. Not a bird, not a star, but a ship, with mast and rigging, drifting across the heavens as though the sky were an ocean. One version tells of the ship lowering an anchor, which snagged itself in the earth of the monastery yard. The anchor held fast, straining against the pull from above. Then a figure was seen climbing down a rope. A sailor from another world, but he moved awkwardly, as if the air itself were water. The crowd pressed in to watch, and when they did, the sailor gasped, struggling for breath as though he were drowning in their world. Terrified, he cut the rope, leaving the anchor behind, and scrambled back to his vessel. Moments later, the ship sailed away into the sky, leaving the monks silent and shaken. What makes this story so strange is the matter-of-factness. The historic records don't treat it as a dream or a miracle. It was written down alongside real events like eclipses and storms, things the chroniclers thought their descendants needed to know. For some, the story is a metaphor, a parable about heaven and earth, or about the thin veil between worlds. For others, it is a piece of folklore that grew more colourful with each retelling. But to UFO researchers, it's one of the earliest airship sightings in human history, a medieval account of something solid, technological, and utterly out of place. And perhaps that is the most compelling part. To the monks of Clonmacnoise, the skies above were mysterious, full of signs and omens. But on that day, they didn't write of angels or demons. They wrote of ships and crews seen in the air. Now, we leap in time to July 1947, the same week as the famous Roswell incident in New Mexico. And halfway across the Atlantic, in a quiet town on the southwest coast of Ireland, a group of ordinary people are about to become part of that story. Caerseveen, County Kerry, a fishing town on the edge of the wild Iveragh Peninsula, the kind of place where mountains fall into the sea, where weather rolls in without warning, and where life is measured by the tides. On a July evening, the sky was still bright with the last colours of summer dusk. That's when 5 locals standing outside saw something impossible. At first, it looked like a flash, a glint, as if sunlight caught on metal. But then it moved, slowly and deliberately, across the horizon. The witnesses watched in silence as the object came into view, a disc metallic, spinning as it travelled. It wasn't a star, or a meteor, or the wing of an aeroplane. It was solid, structured, moving in a way that no ordinary craft could. And perhaps, most unsettling of all, it was silent. One man later described how it seemed to shimmer as it rotated, reflecting the fading light in strange patterns. Another swore it shifted direction suddenly, darting with a speed that defied belief. For several minutes the group stood, rooted to the spot, staring up at the sky. In that moment, Kersavine, this small coastal town, became one of the first places in Ireland to witness what the press had just begun calling a flying saucer. The story reached the Irish Times within days. "Flying saucer seen in County Kerry," the headline read. The timing was extraordinary. Only 5 days earlier, newspapers around the world had carried reports of the crash at Roswell. The Irish sighting was now part of a global mystery. So, what did they see? Some would argue it was an aircraft seen at an odd angle, the trick of light at dusk, or even a meteor breaking the horizon. But the witnesses insisted otherwise. This wasn't fleeting. It wasn't a streak of light. It was a craft, spinning. Kersavine's sighting wasn't unique. Across Ireland, in the following years, reports began to surface. Lights, shapes, discs, objects that defied explanation. 1947 was just the beginning. But for the 5 who stood beneath the Kerry sky that summer evening, they didn't need newspaper clippings or American headlines to convince them. They'd seen it with their own eyes. A metallic disc, spinning, silent, moving against the laws of nature as they knew them. And then it was gone. The 1980s brought a new wave of Irish sightings. In County Tipperary in 1984, a teenager walking home saw a bizarre object he later described as looking like a fried egg, a glowing disc with a darker dome. It buzzed like a chainsaw, dazzling him with light, before slipping into the night. That same year, in Falcarra, Donegal, an off-duty garda and a farmer saw something else, a grey craft, shaped like a household iron, racing low over the bogs. A roaring gush of sound followed in its wake. Reports like these appeared across the country. Triangular shapes, domes, brilliant orbs. They weren't just lights in the distance, they were objects, and they left witnesses shaken. And so, across Britain and Ireland, from the wild coasts of Wales to the dark forests of Suffolk, the rolling fields of Scotland, and the mist-laden shores of Kerry, a pattern seemed to emerge. Lights that hovered, craft that vanished, figures glimpsed in the shadows. The official records may be stamped and filed, but the stories remain, whispered in pubs, retold on stormy nights, and carried in the memories of those who looked up and saw the sky looking back.